and otherwise it would be great to see your lovely faces. So again, just welcome to our advocacy session. This is something that Environment Hubs has been looking at getting more into, and we've got a bit of a mix today of advocacy from our organisation's point of view and also from a hub's point of view, and we would like to get you to contribute a little bit in the meeting as well. So I've got a bit of an activity for you to participate in. I've got the lovely Emma with me from Hawke's Bay, Sustaining Hawke's Bay Trust. She's also on our board, so it's really wonderful to have Emma's expertise here, and just thank you for your time, because I know that everyone is really busy. So hopefully you've all got access to that agenda. I'll just quickly go over what we're going to talk about. Emma and I will introduce advocacy in general. We'll then go through to some advocacy that we would love you to talk to MPs about. We know that MPs are doing the rounds, and if they're not doing the rounds, we'd love to get you to invite them in. And there's 3 little things that we would love you to get across to them when they do come and see you. We are going to then cross to Emma for her experience and what she does in advocacy, and then we'll look to close up just before 2. So I think just advocacy in general, and actually I'll just check whether any apologies that anyone had. I haven't received any. Sorry, Kerry, yes, if you have entered the chat afterwards, I'll just pop that again in the chat.
Sorry, thank you.
No, that's all right. Don't apologise. That's on me. We might actually just do a quick work round and just do some quick introduction. So I should have said called Georgina Ho. I'm the executive officer. I have been in this role for about 7 years, and every day is exciting because there's always lots of inspiring opportunities. Every day I feel like I connect with someone and get even more excited about the possibilities. We just need a bit more time in the day and a few more million in the bank, but we're doing really well, and our relationship with MFE seems to just keep getting better and better, which is exciting. Hopefully I can share some of that good news with you in the near future. I'm just going to pass over to Emma to introduce yourself, and then maybe Emma, if you just pick on someone to pass it on to.
Okay, kia ora koutou katoa, Emma Hogan hiki aho. So as George mentioned, I'm the CE for Sustaining Hawke's Bay Trust, and on the board, and really enjoying the diversity of what we look at and do there. Sorry, I can't see everyone. My picture's gone. Just a second.
Maybe I can check it to people then. I'll check it to Ben, who's also on the board.
Somehow I knew I was next. Kia ora everyone, I'm Ben. I'm the trust manager for Christchurch Enviro Hub and have been so for just over 1.5 years now. I'm also on the EHA board. I will pass it to Heather.
Kia ora, my name's Heather, and I'm the marketing and communications lead at Sustainability Trust. So I've been on board since the end of March, so I'm pretty new to the Sustainability Trust. I feel like I'm getting a handle on that, but I'm very new to this area, so I'm really excited to learn a little bit more. And I realize that we've had a long-standing relationship over the years that Polly is filling me in on, and so and apologies from Polly and Georgie today. They are out currently cleaning up Wellington in the community cleanup. So I'll be representing Sustainability Trust today.
Great to have you with us, Heather. Should we go to, I'll pick on Helen.
Kia ora te whanako, Helen tōko ingoa, and I am the Communications and Events Lead for Environment Network Manawa 2, and I'm going to keep it brief and I'll just pass directly on to my colleague Frederike.
I don't know if my mic's working, is it? Yep. Had a stereo thing going on there. I'm Frederike. I have been here about 4 months, and my label is Waste Minimisation Project Lead. Before that, I was the CEO of Green Sky Waste Solutions, who used to curbside recycling Napier, Hastings, Central Hawke's Bay, and we had our own MRF. And now I'm doing my dream job. Thank you.
Awesome. Lovely to have you with us.
Thank you.
Shall we go to Kitty?
Kia ora, ko Kiri Te Wano Whakaoinga. I'm Director of Project Tongariro in the Central North Island, connected with Tongariro National Park, and we do conservation, restoration programs, environmental education and conservation advocacy work.
Oh, thank you. Alida.
Kia ora, ko Alida Takuingoa. I'm on the board of Go Eco and ENM and EHA. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I'm in the office today and it is rather cold, so kia ora.
Yeah, should we go to Kathy and Laura?
Kia ora koutou, Laura from EnviroHub. And kia ora, I'm Kathy from EnviroHub, and it was great to meet some of your lovely faces at the recent hui. So, thank you. And it's cold here too, Elodie. It's not really, it's just Laura's always cold. I'm sweating.
Laura has Mediterranean blood, so that's why you're cold, Laura. I know you. Chris. Oh, Chris, poor thing.
Kia ora koutou, ko Chris Smith, toku ingoa. Yes, I am homesick with COVID. My whole entire house, padlet and everything. It's great. All in one wham. Anyway, so I'm with Sustainable Wanganui. I actually wear a few other hats. I'm on the Taranaki Wanganui Conservation Board as well, and I work for the Palmerston North City Council in a bit of an environmental space. So I wear a few different hats, but for today I am Sustainable Wanganui.
Oh, thank you, Chris, and please feel free to turn your camera off if, yeah, poor thing. Hopefully you're all better soon. Have we missed anyone? I think we've done everyone. Great. Okay. So one thing I did just want to raise is that EHA, or Environment Hubs, is actually a beautiful example of advocacy. So previous to me coming on 7 years ago, about 9 years ago, a group of 13 centres got together and said, hey, we can work more collectively. And they advocated to Ministry for the Environment to give us some seed funding to get our collective underway. And fast forward a couple of years and we went to MFE again and said, hey, centres need more money and we need more ops money to help support them. And so that was successful. So I just thought I'd chuck that in there as a really good example of collective action and advocacy from actually all of the centres, and that's why we're here today. So great to have you with us. So Emma, I'll pass over to you, and I think we'll introduce advocacy in general and why we're here and what we're talking about.
Okay, so advocacy is just such a broad topic, and when I think of advocacy, I don't just think of going in and talking to ministers or to councillors. I think that if you're to look at advocacy in its true sense, it's about systems change, and there's so many parts to advocacy. And I think the simplest way I look at it is, first of all, you have to know what you want, and you have to be able to tell the story of what you want really, really well, and to be able to build a movement behind that from the community. And it's that movement's very important for getting your story across. And then the other component is actually being able to go and advocate with that behind you. But we're going to look at an example shortly, which is to do with reusables and coffee cups, to explain what systems changes. Because if the storytelling, the movement building and the advocacy is not enough on its own, you've actually got to step back and look at the system and look at all the things that are holding the situation that you're advocating for change against in place. George, do we just want to jump straight into that one? Okay, so I'm just going to share screen. Hopefully this works. Just give me 2 seconds. It decided to do a shutdown and restart, but just 2 seconds from beginning. Should be able to do it now. No, it's not going to do it. Okay. Yeah, if you could. Sorry, my PowerPoint keeps closing. It's just decided that that's enough.
Okay, just open it with Google Slides so that we're not looking at something super little.
Okay, it is super. Oh, there we go. It's bigger now. So to understand system change, we're going to talk about reusables, and we're going to talk about again. So the question is, how do we design? How do we use design thinking to advance systemic change one cup at a time? So if we go down one, George, is that? There you go. So worldwide, 250 billion cups are produced each year and go to landfill. So we need to look at a solution collectively that can change that picture and move our communities to reusables. So what we need to do before rolling out reusables, we actually need and look at how we can scale them. We need to look at customer needs, business realities, infrastructure challenges, legislation, council levers, influence, movement builders. So it's not as simple as just buying a whole lot of cups and then deciding that you're going to put them in the community and make it work. To give you an example, I don't know how much you've gone and questioned cafes, etc., on how again is working for them. I, as part of the use case that we had here for the wash station and reusables, went and talked to 5 cafes that were said to be using again, and 3 of them weren't because of all the complexity involved in trying to get the users and all the systems working. So if we started at the beginning with again and looked at all of these areas, we might be able to design something that will hold in place. So if we go for the next slide.
Do you want to just quickly explain what again is? Because I think.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
You go.
Well, so Nada was one of the founders of Again, but was working for Sustainability Trust quite some time ago and wanted to do something that was more system change than just the keep cups, etc. So where it's working really well. And so I think it started mostly in the kind of the biggest centres, so Wellington, but it is throughout a lot of areas in New Zealand now. So essentially you go and pay just a little bit extra for your stainless steel cup. It might be just a couple of dollars, and so each time you go back to a cafe that is involved in that system, so Wellington Hospital is an example. Hopefully you aren't in the situation where you have to use it there, but there is a cafe, so that's where I've used it, because it's not in my little small town in Pahiatua, but essentially you have that cup. When you go back to get another cup of coffee, instead of them having to wash it or you have to get it sterilized, they take it away and give you a new cup. So you've always got a cup and you're just returning it. It does mean that you have to go back to a cafe that is involved in that. Again is also looking at other situations such as your takeaway containers and other journeys.
So it's a super cool initiative, and it's something that we in Hawke's Bay here definitely want to support. So last year our council got 10 cafes to trial again. No, it was the year. I think it was the year before now. All the years blend into and together with everything that's happened. And unfortunately, I think only one of those cafes is continuing on. And so we did a little bit of research to understand why that is and asked lots of questions. So what I would do differently, having looked at how that rolled out and what happened there, is I'd take more of a systems change approach to it. So there's 5 steps in a traditional systems change approach, and this one's specifically looking at reusable coffee cups. The first one is to prep. So you have to think about who's going to be involved in the system. So you've got your potentially you've got your customers, you've got the cafe that's selling it, you've got whoever's going to do the washing. There could be a lot of other players, and we'll get into that shortly. So you have to identify who they are and have questions for them to actually understand how again might work for them, and then how the process could work. Bearing in mind this is them not having actually implemented something like this, and so they won't know the right answers or the right questions to ask during this stage. The second one is to actually observe. So that's to go into the cafes and watch and see how cups are used. And this is where you'll find things like, oh gosh, there's some spelling in there. This is where you'll find some things like Cups must be easy to grab with one hand, they must nest well, easy to stack, must communicate branding. So by observing, you're picking up things that you wouldn't necessarily get by asking or preparing your questions. And then the next one is to interview. So set up interview with barristers, managers, customers, asking them more open-ended questions of how and why, to understand what they have as pain points now and what they perceive as pain points for a reusable system and the systemic disconnects. And then you need to go out and research others that have done it well and learn from them. And then you're at a stage where you can actually map out what the system could look like. So it's quite an involved process. It's not just, oh, we think this will work, we'll ask a few people if it'll work, and then we'll advocate for it to happen with the community. You actually have to understand where all the problems and complications are going to be from the very beginning. So it's a very different way of thinking. So if we, so I think the easiest way to cement that thinking is probably to start looking at something in the Jamboard. Just to talk about the mapping out part, which is the bit that I think is the most important at the end. You need to understand who all the parties are that will be involved in the process, but you also need to be able to identify any levers that are holding things in place at the moment. So for example, let's say there's an opportunity to you have a lever that actually council requires vendors not to generate so much waste. That's a lever that could be turned on. So it's identifying those kind of things. So if we look at the Jamboard.
So I've just put the link into the chat, and there's also a link in the agenda if you're already in there. Is anyone not able to access their chat or the Jamboard? Just let me know.
Oh, okay, so this is more. Okay.
But we can create anything you want. I can do it quickly if you tell me what to do, Emma.
Yep. Okay. So I think let's use this as an example. Let's decide we wanted this straight without looking at the system. We just wanted to go out and advocate for change. I think what we would probably, how would we do that? Well, I guess how would we do that without looking at a systemic change?
Do you want to come up with an example, work out from there?
Yeah. So let's say we didn't look at the whole picture and we decided we were going to advocate. We might just go to the council and tell them a story about why it's so important. I guess what are the flaws with doing that? I'm just trying to think how to ask the right question to. So for example, if we're looking at the design, we'll step through it step by step. So if we're looking at the design process, who are the players that are likely to be involved in a system when it comes to reusable cups? So by players, I mean, obviously you've got your cafes, but who else is going to have to be there for the transaction to work in making reusable cups sustainable?
Obviously the customers.
Yep.
Anyone is welcome to make sticky notes as well. You can chuck them in.
Yeah. So I guess if you look at it from a current perspective, yeah, manufacturers of cups. Yep, absolutely. I mean, in cups, are there certain products that you can't use or you can use in paper cups or in metal cups? So it's thinking much more than just the customers in the cafe. It's anyone that would be involved. I mean, even the waste, how they deal with waste and how they do that. Yeah, and how, and we can think broader than that. Are there any council or law or other restrictions that are involved in cups and waste and how cafes work?
So around some of those is probably, you know, your council policies, isn't there, around like your events team, events, etc.
Yeah, and even your the council, there's a food act where you've got to have things certified as well. So there's, as you can see, that there's lots of things that hold a system in place. It's not just your advocating against council to change things. There's lots of players involved in the system. So Ministry of Health is another. Is it Ministry of Health that does the food act, or is it the councils? I think it's both. Yeah. And then to give you another example, in COVID time, there's Ministry of Health about sterilisation and reusables. So I think that gives you an idea of some of the players. The next question is, if you were to observe how interactions work in a cafe with cups, what do you think some of the really basic needs would be for those cups to be able to achieve, to be accepted? So we had some example in the presentation of easy to stack and communicating branding, but do you think there would be any other requirements?
Cost?
I'd say heat as well. You don't want to be holding a cup that's really hot.
Some of the feedback that we received when we were doing our research was that there has to be lots of opportunity for them to be returned in different places, so that people didn't want to have to come back to the same point every day to return them. Another requirement that came up from the cafes is that people can't return cups that are really crusty and haven't been cleaned and it's been sitting on your shelf at home for a week. So you get the idea. There's lots of things that will put cafes off or put users off from using the cup. So it's the observation that starts to pick up some of the intricate details of that. And then with the interviews, we can imagine the barristers and managers, what would their concerns be in using a reusable system.
We talked a little bit about the policies, haven't we? Make sure it's health and safety.
Would you guys prefer if we say it out loud or just put
Yeah, because I kind of feel like I'm talking to myself.
Because I'm putting lots of post-it notes, but I know I'm not saying it verbally. I put cost and time for using the reusable system. So obviously it might take more time for the staff to be navigating that instead of just chucking things straight in the bin. And same for cost to paying people for that time, but also any policies, procedures, extra admin, and bringing the cups in, getting them washed, that sort of thing. So there's quite a few costs that would probably come with it.
Yeah. A couple of other ones that came up with the initial again cups, they were single walled and people were burning their hands every time they picked them up, and they had to put a disposable sleeve on it. So they felt that was against what they were trying to achieve. That's just an example of product design. And another one was with the cups. The fact that you had a deposit held on your, this was initially how it was set up, a deposit held on your bank card until you returned it. They didn't like that process, and the cost also was higher than the single-use cups.
So Emma, I'm just thinking, what's the Environment Hub role in this? So is it that when there are solutions that we work with those people and make sure that it is a system change, or is it that when we're doing it, we make sure that we step through all of these processes?
I think that actually looking at this last night, there's two things. So I think anything that you're trying to change, so I guess what I'm trying to get to is that it's not as simple as going to the council and advocating for something. You've got to look at all the things that hold the problem in place and come up with the solutions. So in this case here, if we were in a perfect world, it would be a network like ours picking it up and working through these problems and actually working with the customers to find a generic solution, and then working on the levers of change. So some of it could be lobbying the councils to put in processes such as for events, you have to have an event waste plan. You can't use single use, you have to use reusables. So it could be something like that, but it's also starting, if you step back and you look at the three areas, telling a story of why we're doing this. So collectively, if all the hubs across the nation were looking at, this is why reusables are important, this is the impact of not doing it, this is the impact of doing it, and then building a movement behind it, and then advocating for change across both the councils, central government, and then I guess it's also working with businesses and cafes. It's not as simple as just putting in place a one piece of advocacy to a council or government. There's research around this particular exercise with cafes taking on reusables and councils putting in legislation. I can find you the paper. Councils putting in legislation to try and push the levers that they had to make it happen, and it actually fell over because all the other levers were still holding it in place, and that was very unusable. It's a very different way of thinking. I know that it's not like advocacy where you write a story, you develop your impact story of why things need to happen, you build a movement, and you go and advocate for it. This is actually stepping back and looking at true full systemic change and all the levers that you need to put something in place. So it's a really, really different way of thinking. I mean, I can also talk about advocacy and what we do just from straight advocacy and LTP processes. That's much easier than trying to think systemically.
Shall we mix up our agenda just a little bit, Emma? I think that might be a nice segue into if you do that, and then we might jump back into that Jamboard and just kind of crowdsource some ideas about what the hubs that we do have on the call are doing in the advocacy space.
Yes, yeah.
And then we'll do the EHA bit at the end. So yeah.
Agreed. I feel like the systemic change is too complex to start with. Okay, so in the advocacy space, we work with, I'll talk about LTP planning. So the first, I don't know, does everyone know what LTP planning is at council?
Nope.
Let's presume not. Maybe just
okay. So every council is required to develop a long-term plan for a 3-year cycle, and it coincides with it when the new councillors have been elected and are in place, and so they help make this long-term plan with their council. In order to do that, they normally go for submissions and consultation with the public on what's wanted for the region, and this is a really good opportunity to get in front of councils to let them know what you would like to do. So generally the approach I take to long-term planning is you know when it's coming, because you know when the council changes and there's a general cycle to it. You think about what it is you need, you look at the council priorities and see how you align, and then you write an impact story. So that's a story of how what you do can help the council deliver what they want and why they need to do what you do. So it's developing a really short, impactful story of why you do what you do. And then what I tend to do, even before the LTP process begins, as I choose, I actually look at all the councillors that exist across council, and I choose the ones that I know will be the most empathetic to what we're trying to achieve. And then I spend time with them talking about the story and testing it on them. Once once we've done that, we then look at how we can get across all the councillors. By the time that it's time to do the consultation, they all know who we are, what we're trying to achieve, and how that aligns to what they want. And we put in a submission paper on that. So in past projects, not necessarily in the environment space, it's been easy to get up to a couple of million following that process. So that's long-term planning in a nutshell. So then every year there's an annual planning cycle. So what that does is that it goes back and it looks at long-term planning and lays out what's going to happen for the next year in relation to the long-term plan. It's very rarely that there's any new money introduced in that cycle. So any money that you want to get, you have to get during the long-term planning process put aside. On occasion, with annual planning, it's possible that there may be an underspend somewhere, or you might be able to convince someone that what you need to do is particularly urgent or relevant for that year. Does that make sense so far? Sorry, I feel like I'm talking to myself. It's really hard.
Emma, if we have questions, would you like those in the chat, or would you like them to be thrown at you?
Yeah, just throw them at me. I prefer lots of questions, don't I?
I have questions, but I'll open it up to anyone else who might have questions about how you do that, or the whole LTP process. Okay. Timing, Emma, is it wise to wait for the letter that says tell us your thoughts, or do you need to get in well before that?
I start well before that. So you're starting to plant ideas, because it might be the tell us your thoughts has already got some of your ideas in there, because you've done some of that pre advocating. But if you have a large project that needs large input, I even go further back than that, and at electioneering stage I get around all the possible new councillors and start to make the conversation then, because at that point in time they're willing to meet anyone, because they're trying to get their voice heard, to get put into power. So I think that's a really good opportunity to start those conversations.
Yeah, cool. And so what I'm hearing is that you're essentially developing that relationship, so it's long term as well. So starting when they're keen on you and continuing those relationships.
Yeah, and so I've got a handful of councillors that I do catch up with every month or every 2 months, just to talk about what's going on. And it doesn't always have to be about the centre or our projects. It's just more keeping that relationship there and seeing how we can support each other, because often councillors need support as well. So
cool. I think I had another question, but it's gone, so maybe I'll just pass back to you.
I don't know, is that useful? Is everyone here doing stuff with LTP submissions and consultation up front?
We're starting to move more into that space. Yeah. And it's definitely good to hear almost just you normalizing the conversations with councillors and saying that it's good to have like catch ups with them just for the sake of having those connections. It's also useful.
Maybe I'll just, sorry, my question came back, Emma. How do you know what to focus on? So obviously that there are many different areas where you could put in submissions on the long-term planning process. Are you just, how do you choose where to focus? So transport is one example where I know we have some hubs working in that space, but we also know it's one of the major areas for climate change. So how do you make those choices? Is it strategy driven from the board? Yeah,
it is. I mean, we go back to our strategy with everything we submit on. But having said that, I mean, you get a wild card like a cyclone, and then you'll submit on things that are probably outside of your strategy, but would have been in your strategy had you known that was going to happen. So that's as broad as we go. We don't tend to step into areas that aren't our general focus, no. But that's long-term planning. To give you an example of something that has happened recently, the cyclone here has thrown up a whole lot of issues, and they're very broad, and recovery brings opportunity for change. And so what we've done is we've partnered across 8 entities. So so it's most of our tangata whenua allies, and then a number of environment organisations, and we've put a collective voice to 8 asks from 5 councils. So we've got 5 councils in the region, and that's a much harder thing to do, because you're not tying it specifically to the long-term plan and very specific outcomes. It's more just ensuring that a voice is heard for the environment and community resilience. It's led to us having more internal conversations with council, but I don't feel that it's actually had the impact that we would like. But that's also partly because of the region that we live in and the drivers behind some of the councils and what happens in that space.
Cool. Should we jump into that Jamboard again on page 2? And maybe I'll just quickly share my screen so I can kind of just, it's up here for the old page 2, this little arrow here. So I'll stop sharing my screen, but just in case you haven't been on Jamboards before, you press that and you get through to page 2. So maybe if everyone could find I've put heaps of stickies in there. If you ever need a new sticky, it's down on there's a column on the left, and there's a bit of a note that you can press. But it'd be great to see what you're advocating on. And you're welcome to talk out loud as well, so that we know that you have many functions of feedback. While you're doing that, I also had in that bottom corner, what happens if we don't advocate? And I think that's a really good question, because you all have such great experience and you're seeing what is happening throughout your regions. Have you ever asked yourselves that question of, it's kind of like if we're not advocating for the environment, is someone else advocating? It might be that you've got a really strong Forest and Bird or EDS, Environmental Defence Society, in your region. So maybe that they're working in this space, and that's kind of good to know as well. Is it that business takes over, etc., that they have, quite powerful lobbyists, and that things don't happen for a few years. So if anyone's ever had those questions of what happens if we don't advocate, it'd be great to get that feedback too. And maybe just out loud while you're making sticky notes, has anyone had some really great success in the LTP where you asked for something and you got it and it's led to contracts, money? Any really great success stories? I might pick on someone. E&M, have you had some great success?
Yeah, we do quite a lot of advocacy, to put it mildly. Yeah, recently we did talk to council. We talked to them last year and we talked to them again this year because they've forgot to write it in, about exploring what they've actually budgeted for now, exploring writing a citywide food policy to link with the Manawatu Food Action Network, which really makes it official that this is a priority for the council. And it's not just something that our organisation and 30 other organisations are working towards. So we've successfully lobbied for that, and it's been confirmed this year that that will have some budget allocated to it.
So that was a citywide food plan?
Citywide food resilience policy, I believe. Yeah.
Sounds awesome. Look forward to hearing more about that.
And they are in various other spaces. I believe Christchurch has one, so it isn't a new thing. But yeah.
And so I guess that's partly why we want to have this conversation. So if anyone is interested in a citywide food resilience policy and you don't have one, then it may be worth talking to Helen or maybe Ben if you've been involved in that. So those other voices where you may have had some success, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You might just be able to borrow someone else's submission and stick your name to it and add some regional flavour. Is there any there that are jumping out at you that you'd like to hear more about, or you'd like to know? Yeah, it's great to have like Sustainability Trust, for example, at the bottom, or E&M, so that people know who to get in contact with. An Enviro Hub, is that like a physical Enviro Hub?
That's us again.
That's
Yes.
you guys. Yeah, okay, so that's a lot
We
of
talk to
battling.
council about it every time there's any budgeting process, and I think it's in their 10-year plan, but you know, with recent events we would be very excited to see an acceleration of that.
Yeah, cool. So I can tell you that the Council in Whangarei, if that's helpful, has just organised a physical Enviro Hub. I don't know how amazing it is, and they're not one of our members. They are very keen in the future to be one of our members. But if anyone is looking at things like saying, advocating for a physical Enviro Hub space, talk to us and say which hubs can we talk to that have had some success there. Yeah, and obviously the Timaru example is one that we always point to. They've had, you know, beautiful success in getting their environment hub up and going. Cool. Okay. So is there any other advocacy on the next page? And I haven't put any sticky notes, but I would be really keen to know about other examples of advocacy and that you've been working on. And this might be that system change. It could be, you know, go back to your transport. It could be talking to an MP. It could be anything, but really keen to hear outside of the LTP what other success that you've had. So perhaps if you could jump through to page 3, I'll just throw some sticky notes there. We're all green today. But if you feel outrageous and edgy, you can click on the left-hand side and make a sticky note of your own special colour. Chris, did you have to do any advocacy around slightly not Enviro Hub, but around Wild Base?
The majority of that was probably done through the trust and through like the likes of Rodney. But there was certainly quite a bit that went into the chamber and then to get support that way. But then there was also a lot of stuff that was talking about the, you know, the councillors with coffee and getting support in the offices. So it was through official channels and then the good old coffee and handshake channels as well.
Nothing like a coffee and handshake. Cool. Does anyone have any good MP stories or local councillor stories? I've got a good one. The EHA funding that we got to fund the hubs, that came directly as a result of a good relationship with an MP who just so happened to be friendly. Very helpful. Otherwise we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. So those relationships are really, really valuable. Anyone else?
Yeah, Georgia, Kiri here, Project Tongariro. We have a service contract with Taupo District Council. We do community plantings, and that came about because our director's son was the CEO of the council. That helped quite a lot too.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we have been talking a lot in various parts of the organisation around great to have those networks, but also that we have to be a little bit transparent. Obviously, if you've read any newspaper in the last month or so, there's been a lot of highlighting of conflict of interest and perception and relationships. And so that's something that we are being very careful about, especially as some of you may know that we are working with Zero Waste Network on the National Food Waste Strategy. So that's going to be a train the trainer type system where we engage hubs and organisations to roll out a particular food waste program. And we're going to have to be very careful when saying, you know, who is friends with who? Are you friends with Chris Luxon, for example? You know, just getting to declare all of those things. So just being really careful around that. But what I do want to say is, you know, it is great to have those relationships. We just need to be really transparent and mitigate where we need to around those. Okay, so what I might just check before I spend a few minutes talking about EHA and a few advocacy little lines that we'd love you to use with MPs. Are there any questions for anyone else on the call, or anything that we've just discussed, or anything that you'd like to take further action on? No. Okay. Feel free to always get in touch with us on that. So if you go back to that agenda document, So that link is back in the chat. I've listed 3 things that we would love you to say to MPs. And we've heard from some of you that MPs are showing up. If they're not, we'd really love you to invite them in, because it's kind of that stage that we talked about before, where MPs or hopeful MPs are very keen to talk to you, and they're in that nice stage. So the first thing that we want you to advocate for is, maybe this is it could be around the opposite way. It could be that you go for number 3 first, depending on how much your MP knows about environment hubs. So maybe we'll start with that one, that actually just getting MPs to understand that we are a thriving network. We have had we've started to reach out across the political, across the political parties is probably the best way to put it. So we have hosted a couple of National Party MPs at some of our hubs, and they had never heard of them. And so that's a real shame. So it's really great to get different flavours of MPs through the door and just get them learning about our environment centres and the great work that you do. So that was that first one, that we're a thriving network, that you're an amazing organisation, but actually that there's 21 other amazing organisations that are members of environment hubs, that we're connected, that we have a lot of support, etc. So that's the first thing I'd love you to get across to any MP, that we exist essentially. Number 2, probably going back, maybe we'll go up. So number 2 is that you are an integral community infrastructure. So we want local and central government to start recognising and consulting you on policy. So that is, any local policy, we think you should be included. They have to include community in that. We want MPs to start looking at us like we are, a library, or like we're roading. We just are that integral part of the community infrastructure. So it's not a nice to have, but we want them to be talking to you and engaging with you and getting your voice into their policy and their decision making. And so coming back to that number 1, this is around funding. So we need hubs to be funded in an ongoing sense. Environment centres have been funded for decades in New Zealand. We need that to continue. We don't want to take for granted that you have been funded for quite such a long time. It must be something that continues. That comes from the Community Environment Fund. We are also keen to grow the Community Environment Fund. At the moment, it's $2 million a year. We would like to increase that. So those are 3 key messages that we would love you to get out to MPs. And if MPs aren't visiting, we would love them to be invited to any events that you've got going on, or even just for a coffee to have a look around. And now's a really good time to get engaged with those local MPs and local representatives. Any questions about that? Maybe I'll just quickly add that one of the easiest ways you can refer to that network. So I could talk all day long about how amazing our network is, but I realise that for those of you who dip into EHA environment hubs and then pop back out to the real world and your real mahi, it might be a little bit harder. So we do have our annual report online on our website. You can also ask us for copies. So if you know an MP is coming to visit in a couple of weeks, we can arrange to get a copy sent to you. It might be something that you can give to them so they don't forget who we are. We also have a 4-pager which just has some of our best data sources together, so that you could speak to that, and that just shows how amazing you all are collectively, and also shows your growth over the last 2 to 3 years. So the funding that we have given hubs has just been amazing, and you've all just grown massively, and collating that data is it's a real powerful story when you give that to MPs. So any questions on that, or any experiences that you want to share about MPs? I do know that, I think it was Emma hosted someone recently and noted a real lack of knowledge around the urgent environmental issues that we're facing and climate change. So I've just put there, be prepared for anything. They all have a different experience and world base.
And particularly when I deal with ministers and advocacy in that space, I always do my research on their views on things as well. So I think that helps inform some of the wildcard questions you might get.
I was just going to say, actually, how do you best converse with people that probably aren't the most environmentally inclined? Do you just figure out commonalities between your hub and what you guys do in comparison to what they may be interested in?
I think Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of it's language. So for example, rather than talking about climate change, if you're talking to someone that's in the like MPI or farming side of things, it's changing weather patterns and impacts your growing outcome. So it's going before you actually meet with someone. It's actually looking at the message you want to convey and then looking for language that would be suitable for them to uptake the message. And so I always look for words that are trigger words for particular industries and don't use them.
Yeah, that's a really good bit of information. Thank you.
Always positive. If we go back to those facts that are in the annual report, everything that the hubs are doing is super positive, and it's it's great for the local economy. It's a real connector. It may be that in the future we look at kind of a whole of person approach. Holistic may not be a word that some Hardys will like, but we know that our hubs are providing a real range of needs to people, not just helping them understand about their biodiversity, for example. But I think you're right, Ben. I think it is about commonalities. There will be something that you can agree on with anyone who comes to visit you, and finding that pretty early on is probably quite key. They've got pages about these people usually, so you can go on and do a little bit of research before they turn up, what their interests are, who they're the spokesperson, what portfolios that they hold, etc. So doing a bit of homework is important.
Totally, I agree.
I just put a link in the chat. I came across this the other day, and it's ignore the fact that it's for the creative industries. It's actually quite a good toolkit on advocacy. It gives good direction on how to write and how to approach advocacy and long-term planning as well. So there's some useful stuff in there.
Okay, so I might round us off. I do want to say that I think there are some opportunities coming up over the next several months, and maybe a bit longer than that. So I did talk to someone about green prescriptions this morning, who is at a secondment for Ministry for the Environment at the moment. She's writing a report based on what she's come from the UK. I think there's some real opportunities there in terms of green prescriptions that all of our hubs could get involved with. There could be some more advocacy around transport. So the Wednesday challenge is up and going in Tauranga, and it might be something that you might want to look at supporting in your area. There might be other areas of advocacy for us as well. MFE have been starting to put together an idea around climate hubs, which we would be part of. We would be the community part of a solution where MFE and our hubs co-designed something so that we're singing off the same page. So I guess we'll be in touch with regards to any of those opportunities coming up, but this is a space that we want to get more involved in. And any issue where you need support, we're also interested in seeing how we can support at your regional levels as well. So always feel free to get in touch and ask us and share your needs and your barriers and your wins, because we like sharing those as well. Any burning questions or comments or anything you want to ask of other networks while they're here? No. Okay, cool. Look, I will close this up. I just want to say thank you for your time, though. Thank you for all the mahi that you do. We really appreciate it. We love being involved with the hubs, and we love seeing your faces as well. So look after yourselves, and I'll just do a karakia whakamutanga. Ka whakairia te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turaki whakataha ai, kia turaki whakataha ai, huia taiakia. Go well, take care. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, George and Emma.